Okay, let's take a look at lesson 7, which is the 8th word, you shall not steal. Remember, y'all, that the shall nots are not kind of grim-fisted you better nots. They are statements of a new reality. You shall not steal. That's a statement of fact. In your love story with God, you don't steal. When God is your one and only, you will live in such a way that you don't steal. This is a mark of life together. This is the way that it is. When I was in college, I went to the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. This was back in the 70s. And on occasion, I would go home to see my folks for the weekends. And I remember this one weekend, it was a beautiful fall day, my senior year. And I was driving back to campus through the back roads, all those pine forests, through the back roads in Alabama. And I had this one little convenience store gas station that I often stopped at on my way back because I would get gas then for the week, and they had donuts there. And so I would always get a big tray of donuts that I took back to campus. I was a little sister at a fraternity, and I always came back from home with a big thing of donuts for the guys in the fraternity. And I remember one day I stopped to get my donuts and get my gas and paid for everything, got back in the car, was driving along, and I was a good 30 miles down the road when I realized that I had picked up a package of Dentyne chewing gum, 25-cent package of Dentyne chewing gum in the store, and I had not paid for it. And I remember I broke out in a cold sweat. I thought to myself, oh my gosh, now I'm a thief. And I drove on a little while and I couldn't stand it. And I turned around, went back to the convenience store, told the guy my story, handed him my quarter, and that man looked at me like I had two heads. Stealing, the little thefts, they are not something with which we are totally unfamiliar in our lives today. Maybe it's not a pack of Dentyne at the convenience store. Maybe it's a box of paper clips from the office, or a borrowed book not returned, or a video copied or pirated online. Or maybe it's the pilfered idea passed off as original. Let's not even talk about the wide world of business or finance, when nipping a little here or there, or padding an expense account, or dodging a bit of taxes can account for billions and be seen as a badge of honor. On the surface, stealing is not something with which we are entirely unfamiliar. We get this one, right? In the beloved community, we don't take stuff that is not ours. Well, sort of. In the biblical world of the Ten Commandments, this caution against stealing does obviously refer to respect for personal property. Although we have to be careful about that, because at that point in our family story, personal property was never understood as exactly personal. All property was tribal in a sense, and everything ultimately belonged to God. But still, stealing was about personal property, and it was about more than that. This word, now just take a deep breath here. This word refers particularly to stealing those necessary goods that make a life of dignity possible. Our love letter from God says to us, you shall not take from a person that which makes a life of dignity possible. Wow. This word is about so much more than a box of paper clips or a 25-cent pack of Dentyne. It has to do with how we create an environment for the security and the dignity of others. It has to do with what our choices either give to or take from others. Now, in the early years, some scholars suggest that the community of Israel understood this command almost in the way that we talk about kidnapping today. You are not to steal persons, to sell them into slavery. It also referred to material, intellectual, and spiritual theft. And it referred to the theft of honor, or what we would call today self-esteem, or even a sense of well-being. Our ancestors understood that this theft could be exercised aggressively in a swift action, or it could be exercised gradually, like small sips of poison. Theft could be exercised with intent. I decide to slip one of your grandmother's pearl-handled butter knives into my pocket when you invite me over for tea cakes and lemonade. That's obvious. I decide to do it. I take the butter knife, I put it in my pocket. Theft could also be exercised without conscious intent, like walking out with the dentine without thinking about it. And we can steal from others without even knowing that we are doing it. How did the ancestors see that happening? Well, the rabbis point out that we steal from others when we fail to notice their need, or fail to take into account how our words hit, or how our actions rob another of their dignity and self-worth. Just be with that for a moment. Each of us, I think, can see 1,000 little ways that we have stolen from others with our prejudices, with our assumptions, with our selective attention, with our inability to give, with our certainty that we are right, with our need to win, with our fear of change. Many times in our history, we have even used God and the Bible itself as the weapon of choice in our armed robbery of the people of God. You know that we have done that. There were years in our family story where we defended from Scripture, no less, the practice of slavery, where we defended from Scripture, no less, the subjugation of women, where we defended from Scripture, no less, the spiritualizing of poverty so that we don't have to deal with it, the demonizing of homosexuals, the demonizing of nations, peoples, religions, ethnic groups, points of view. Just recently, we have heard some people use the Bible to justify taking children from parents at our border and losing nearly 1,500 of them. All that by way of saying, we know how to use the Bible to rob people of that which makes a life of dignity possible. We even steal people's, often whole people groups' stories right out of our history books. We disappear them and rob them of that which makes a life of dignity possible in doing so. We do this as powerful nations, as well when we consume more than our share of resources while others scrounge and starve unnoticed. Now, gradually, over time, God's people began to understand that this commandment meant that, as Walter Harrelson in his book, The 10 Commandments and Human Rights says, this is a quote, "Persons are not to whittle down, eat away at, the selfhood of individuals or of families or of communities," end quote. Richard Levy, a contemporary Jewish theologian, lists a number of things that are understood as violations of this command, like keeping another person waiting because you steal their time, or misleading flattery because it steals a bit of the truth from a person. Or again, gossip shows up here, the lashon hara, the language of hurt. And can't you think of other things? Snide remarks spoken to be cute, never having time for family and friends, belittling others in order to just feel like you are okay somehow, belittling others' feelings, their experiences, their very existence, assuming that others agree with us or should agree with us. Stealing is something that we know how to do, even if we've never broken and entered. In a cosmic sense, we have broken and plundered. In addition to our personal behavior, this word asks us to consider social behavior as well. The terrible inequalities between haves and have-nots are violations of this command. When 20% of America's children live in poverty, that is robbing them of the life of dignity, and it is a violation of this word. This is not what God's people do, y'all, and it is not what God's people allow. Those inequalities rob God of those people and their capacity to live up to their full potential. Remember that we are called to honor life, to not take life. We can't rob people of the promise through adultery, and now we see that we are not allowed to take from anyone that which makes simple breathing in and out into living. In our great love story with God, God tells us when we are together, when we are living out of our values, we do not take from one another that which makes a life of dignity possible.